Fast am I, good afternoon. Welcome along to Manx Radio's Mannin Line for Friday, 15th of December. Alex sitting in once again for Andy, who's unwell. Get well soon, Andy. And it's a special this afternoon. I'm joined in the studio live by the Isle of Man's Chief Minister, Alfred Cannan, MHK. What would you like to talk to him about? It's open line with the Chief Minister through until 1 o'clock. There's a whole host of topics we can get through. It's been a bit of a roller coaster week in Tynwald. We're talking about everything from our territorial seas, freedom of information, gas, and I'm sure there's plenty more that you'd like to talk about as well. So give us a call on 66 13 68. Don't leave it till the last minute. Well, first of all, Mr. Cannan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And thank you very much for coming in today. It's been quite a roller coaster week in Tynwald for you for a start. Two defeats when it comes to the vote on the territorial waters and also the Office for Human Resources report. Do you feel that there's a bit of a rebellion in your backbenchers?
Well, no. I mean, there's no such thing as an easy week in politics, and I haven't known an easy week in Manx politics for 4+ years now. Ever since COVID came along, then that's nearly it is almost 4 years ago since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic and the impacts that had. And I can tell you for the last 4 years, every week has thrown up something new. And look, Tynwald is a functional parliament. I think it's healthy and it's good that occasionally Parliament decides and that the Council of Ministers is not necessarily going in the right direction on a couple of issues. I mean, clearly one has to determine exactly what the government is being defeated on. I think this was a report, an HR report. Frankly, it's been published now. I think people will understand why we wanted a bit more time to assess a report that says you're going to create 54 new jobs and spend £3 more million. And I'll come on to why we needed some more time, if that's an explanation. But Tynwald wanted that published, so we'll obviously have to deal with all the questions around that. It's unfortunate because we put in a new chief executive officer. We've reformed actually the whole executive team now, as you know, on the back of the Ransom affair and the consequences of that employment tribunal. We've also changed the way that government's operated. We've put an operations performance board. We've done a huge amount in terms of also bringing in non-executive advisors in certain areas to make sure that more governance is applied. And this reform of HR was one of the areas that we identified and we needed to strengthen and get a grip of. But sometimes government thinks it needs a bit more time. Tynwald felt they wanted to see exactly what was being proposed. So there it is. That's out. And then when it came to the
before you move on, I've got to pick you up. You said you were going to come back on the timing. The report's dated March 2023, and you wanted until April 2024. Why was it going to take so long? Why was it going to take a year?
Well, because as I've just explained, we've also been in quite a transitional period in terms of the senior executive team. As you know, we were going through a recruitment process. It does take time to get people through to that selection process and then go through the interview process. You know that the new chief executive officer, Andy Ralph's only started at the beginning of November. The new chief operating officer that we brought in as part of these reform structures, and there were various other senior appointments going through the process. We've only just commenced the appointment of the permanent position for the Director of Human Resources as well. So there's a lot there to factor in, Alex, and it's important we get this right and we don't rush it. Okay, so we're adamant that we were going to use obviously that the concern that had been expressed around the employment tribunal to try and drive through proper reforms so that both the culture in government but also the operational effectiveness was as good as it can be, and we've made significant progress in that respect, and that's why we needed more time. And we need more time when somebody says, well, actually you need another 54 members of staff and you need to spend an extra £3 million of taxpayers' funds. We've also got a number of other critical operational issues that we are trying to resolve and sort out at the moment. And of course, we have an extremely challenging public finance position at the moment, as we know. And we're both having to come to terms with that, but also figure out how that is going to be dealt with in next year's budget, and the Treasury Minister has to get to grips with that as well. So there's not just £3 million floating around government that we're just going to throw at something, and we are taking a proper, considered approach in our approach to delivering reform in the greater interests of effectiveness, efficiency, but also in terms of those people who work for the government and deliver public services.
I get all that, and it's a lot of technical government speak. In terms of the headline, you mentioned it there yourself, an extra £3 million for possibly more than 50 new jobs, and you wanted to release that report in April next year. Isn't that just putting off a bad headline in terms of our economic status till after the budget?
No, the critical thing, that report was going to get released, clearly, but what was fundamentally important alongside that, and I think people should know when these reports are released, ideally, is what government is actually going to do. And we are not in that position yet. And there could be other impacts in other areas if you just decide that we are going to follow every single recommendation in that report. And as I said, when you put in a new executive team, when you go through that whole process of reform, and we've reformed the whole effectively top tier in government in many ways. We've put in a new operations performance board to hold the chief executive officer to account. We've changed the job functions from chief executive officers through these departments to chief officers. We've strengthened the lines of accountability. And this is all about delivering better public services, but having effective governance and control, but also accountability when it comes to the top level of decision making. So these reforms are happening. Of course, they take time in terms of the impacts, but what should have happened, really, in our view, was we should have delivered that report alongside a proper government response. So rather than big speculations that we are going to hire 54 people and we are going to spend £3 million, and at this moment I don't know, we needed that time and space. And that's what really we said to Tynwald, but Tynwald clearly wanted it published.
OK, we'll come back to the improvement in public services later on. We've got a few people on the phones. First of all, Andrew is on wanting to talk to the Chief Minister. Andrew, you're live with Alfred Cannan.
Hi, good afternoon, Chief Minister. In the UK, if Prime Minister Rishi Sunak had brought something to the Commons that had been defeated, there'd be a situation where the men in grey suits would be speaking with him and there would be a call for a vote of confidence. Are you certain that the Comin will not be having a vote of confidence in you, and why should the House of Keys not have a vote of confidence in you? Many thanks.
Well, Andrew, I mean, normally, well, first of all, in the UK, they elect a party and you normally elect your Prime Minister. So the structure of governance is very, very different. We're not an authoritarian state. In other words, there's no party system here in terms of what is presented to the electorate. So there is a variance there. And secondly, I think this was just a general debate motion. Yes, it's asked the government to do things. If it was a piece of critical legislation that the government thought was critical and we were defeated, then clearly when you get into those situations, then questions do need to be asked. But I don't regard it as the release of an HR report to be a critical matter.
I think in terms of Andrew's question there, I mean, this obviously is in a bigger picture. We've mentioned that also the defeat on the territorial waters vote. In the bigger picture, Chief Minister of Guernsey, of course, lost a vote of no confidence and has been replaced. And it was at the end of the last administration that Daphne Kane introduced this process for ousting a Chief Minister with a simple majority. Do you feel you've still got the authority? It seems you have fewer friends on the back benches. Do you feel you've still got authority over the government in terms of being able to get votes through on, as you say, possibly minor votes, but also significant legislation?
Well, look, this has happened many times before. This is not a unique position. But as I say, it depends on the subject matter and the importance that's placed on it. These are not matters of national importance to which the government is staking its credibility. This was an HR report, and the economic zone, in terms of the position, is made quite clear by the UK. And the last letter to the government, I know it was 25 or 30 years ago, clearly said, you have no legal basis for that claim. We consider the matter closed. Now, clearly, Tim will say, well, we want you to write to the UK government again. Fine. If they come back and say no again, who should be resigning? I'm not sure. So these are not matters. If you're talking about critical legislation, and you're talking about a government position that needs to be sustained for the national interest, then it is a different matter.
Okay, Andrew, has that answered your question?
Yes, but I would please like Chief Minister to identify what are the top 3 priorities facing his government, his administration.
Chief Minister.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. I mean, Council of Ministers have recently been looking at this. First and foremost, the need now for strong financial discipline. We have a significant deficit that we are dealing with, and that deficit is eating into our reserves, and that matter must be dealt with properly in financial discipline because of all the overspends that have been happening over the last 12 months in particularly with the health department, but in other areas as well. That needs to stop. The second priority is the energy situation, the offshore and onshore energy. We must make significant progress because we are working to deadlines, and the island must have complete knowledge and confidence that we will have energy security from the 2030s moving forward. And then there's a number of priorities, but the economic performance and economic growth of the island is strongly up there in that top 3 as well. We've set out a strong economic programme that revolves around ensuring that we create these new jobs, that we start to change both the economic performance of the island, but also some of the demographic issues and challenges that we're facing, and that's definitely on the top 3 register as well.
There we go. Thank you, Andrew, for your question there. I'll pick you up, Chief Minister. You mentioned there about financial situation and the deficit. And obviously the Treasury Minister, Alex Salmondson, has got a challenge on his hands. How much of this is basically him having to pick up where you left off? Because in terms of your role as the Treasury Minister, we spent, I've glibly said on air a few times before, we've spent in the past like a drunken sailor on leave in terms of the amount of money that our sea links have cost us, not just in the purchase of the steam packet, the loan for the Manxman, the loans to the steam packet itself, the ferry terminal in Liverpool. We're talking hundreds of millions of pounds here. We're now getting to the point, as you say, where money is drying up. OK, we have a financial deficit and we're taking from reserves, but we've spent a huge amount of those reserves. How much is basically what was set in place when you were Treasury Minister is now coming back to bite us, as it were?
Well, so first of all, when I was Treasurer, we've been dealing with the deficit probably since about 2008 when that VAT agreement was changed. You know, when I first came into Parliament, it was a very, very difficult 5 years for Alan Bell and Eddie Tier, and we know that some of the impacts that were felt during that time as belts were tightened and charges were levied, etc. You know, 2016 to 2021, I think we'd moved to a position where we had restored growth again into the economy, and that we had a very controlled budgetary plan. Although we were still running a deficit, that deficit was counteracted quite significantly by the interest that was coming from the reserves, and actually often that was actually resulting in a surplus. What has changed significantly is, first of all, COVID, the cost to government of dealing with the COVID crisis, and then that's been compounded significantly by both energy costs and also that peak period, sort of 2021-22, when energy costs started to spike significantly, and of course really what's done the damage has been inflation. And that has blown off course the financial plan. And we are in a position now.
You do get more income tax receipts, though, from inflation, don't you?
Yes,
so
but if spending is outstripping basically what we are getting in. And that has changed. That emphasis has changed now more drastically because of inflation. And it needs recorrection. And we're going to have to do that and figure that out in the next 12 months. But first and foremost, what we've got to do now is get everybody in a very delicate situation like this, is get everybody operating absolutely strictly within their allocated budgets.
So the spending on things like 300 odd million on the sea links and everything else, that hasn't had an effect on the situation we're in now.
I wouldn't start convoluting various items of spending, right? Buying the steam packet was a well thought out, absolutely necessary decision. And let me say, if we'd not done that, Alex, just imagine the chaos there would have been for the 2 years of the COVID crisis and what we would have had to do to have funded a private company during that period.
Would that have topped the money we've spent?
Well,
on
I don't know, Alex. I mean, but I'm just saying we had control of our vital national security strategic transport asset, And that was absolutely the right thing to do, as was demonstrated, as it happens, 18 months after purchase when coronavirus and COVID came along. Secondly, that business in itself is operating still to a very, very good profit level. Now, we need to look at that profit level and ask ourselves, do we need the steam packet to earn all that money, £15 million a year? So
because you didn't receive a dividend this year, did you?
Well, the Treasury Minister, I think, is taking out £1 million a year now from
that's
the company.
That's paying the loan of the Manxman, but the dividend to shareholder was nil.
We're not taking dividends per se from that business. Okay,
so what income is it paying?
It is building up its cash reserves, which is going to need the cash reserves for any future capital acquisitions, i.e. new ships, and it's scheduled to have a new fast craft within the next few years, and we'll obviously have to pay for that. So let's park that, because that argument, I think anybody who's saying that does not commercially work is wrong, full stop. We are getting a significant return for our £120 million investment into that business. The issue of the capital expenditure, however, is unfortunate and is a different matter, and that project, as we all recognise, although it will have longer term dividends in having that asset there in Liverpool for the long term next 200 years, the interim cost or the short term cost of that, and going from where it started at £25 million and ending up now where it is at £75-80 million, and we've still got to define the final figure, clearly is one of those capital projects that carries with it significant levels of regret in terms of the way that costs have spiralled. Again, though, some of those costs have spiralled because of COVID and because of inflation, but nevertheless, it's been a capital project that has eaten into our reserves.
If you knew now what you knew then back as Treasury Minister, what would you say about the Liverpool Ferry Terminal?
Well, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? I mean, as it stood at the time in terms of what we were told for delivery, then it made sense. I think what will need to be looked at now, the Public Accounts Committee and the Scrutiny Committees who are looking at this will clearly have something to say when they review the circumstances of everything that's happened, including the initial assessment of the value of the land. But we did a thorough consultation was carried out. In fact, that was started before I joined the government in 2016. But the majority of people on the island who responded to that consultation said, yes, we want to go to Liverpool, and that will be the best place for you to secure our future. Because bear in mind, we were going to lose that berth that we were currently and have been using at the moment.
One final question on this, and then we'll get to June, who's on the phone lines. You mentioned there about how the steam packet it was a good business decision and it's working a good return on investment. How are we getting that return on investment? I put to you that we didn't get a dividend as a shareholder. So how is that money coming back? Aside from paying off the loans, because I know part of the purchase was also paying off existing loans, and there's the loan for the Manxman, and that's obviously, loans are a normal thing when it comes to building new craft. How are we making money now from the steam packet, or is it in that phase where really at the moment we've had a lot of outlay and the true potential is still to be realised?
Well, I think so in the longer term. So basically, the steam packet is, as you say, is paying back what it requires to pay back under the agreement to the taxpayer. In essence, the rest of the money is profit, and that profit at the moment is staying in the steam packet. And it is needed to stay in the steam packet because they will need soon to start planning for and purchasing a new fast craft to replace the existing fast craft. So they have capital costs to pay in the future, and we want the company to continue to operate efficiently, effectively, and at profit, so that it is well prepared to cover any both unforeseen issue, but also as well prepared for the future to meet the future spending that it needs to undertake.
You're not expecting another request for a loan for the next ship. You're hoping they're going to pay that themselves.
I think, as I understand it, that is being paid for by the current build-up of the of the assets.
Thank you.
The cash profit. Sorry.
Thank you. June, you've been waiting patiently on the line. Good afternoon. You're live with the Chief Minister.
Hey, Alex. Hey, afternoon, Alf. How are you?
Good afternoon, June. Very well, thank you.
Good, and thank you for giving us all the chance to be able to put questions to you on the programme. I'm sure you're a busy person. I'm looking at, just quickly on the start of this, I'm just going to do an overreach because I haven't got time to drill into anything with you on this programme. I've seen a recent picture of you with Leo Varadkar from Ireland and Mark Drakeford, both leading lights during the COVID period of freedom and freedom of movement, I should say, not. And I'm looking now at the euphoric response of Mark Drakeford's resignation yesterday in Wales, and also looking at a video of Leo Varadkar as one of the young leaders of the World Economic Forum getting praised within the Klaus Schwab bit. But I'll just park that for a minute and come back to that. I'm sure the people around you, like Sam and everyone, gives you updates of what's going on social media and the radio, and I'm sure you listen to this program, as a lot of people do. And I have to put to you, you must understand at the moment, I've not seen for some time, so much distress from the local people of what is happening nationally to the island. The Manx seems to be getting drawn out of the Isle of Man by this administration or the administration before. And it seems to be getting very diluted. And people are getting very edgy about what's going on, Alf. The overspends of government. And I hear you say now that it's getting reined in, but it's already happened. That's stable, door and horse. The money's being spent, and on some occasions, not very wisely. And I could drill into quite a few other things, but my overview of this is Kerman seems to be a law unto itself at the moment, and it seems to be doing what it wants to do, especially with this energy situation, these wind turbines. And I go back to what I said before with Varadkar and the World Economic Forum, and I'm going to go on to ESGs and DEIs and ask you this question. Who is government and this administration working for the most at the moment? Are they working for Whitehall? Are they working for BlackRock, ESGs and the World Economic Forum agenda? Or are you working for the people of the island?
Chief Minister.
Well, there's a lot there, Ewan. But bottom line is, of course, we're working for the people of the island. You know, we have set out a very clear plan, an island plan, an economic strategy for this island to tackle all the problems that you are talking about. And let's face it, I mean, this globally at the moment, both economically and socially, there are huge numbers of issues. Some of those as a result of COVID, some of them now as a result of inflation, and others as a result of the significant period of transition that we and other nations are in because of the global adoption of a drive towards changing effectively the balance of power when it comes to energy and energy sources. Hang on, Alex, I need to finish. And energy sources, right? So we are dealing with a huge number of issues, and partly within that, right, when you take that down to the island's position and why we're trying to address things in our island plan is an aging population that is putting huge pressure on our health services and the health service delivery. And as a consequence, because of that aging population, the fact people are living longer, medicines and all the rest of it, you know, one of the critical issues that is driving this economic overspend and some of the problems is really around health and what we're paying for it, because the health overspends year on year. Of course, one of the reasons why we created Manx Care was to try and bring this under control. Have been way beyond anything that's been predicted, and it's a demand-led service, and the demand is increasing. And of course, the other issue on that, because it's putting so much cost pressures on government finances for a very low-income government, a very low-tax government, you know, we are trying to do our very, very best to resolve that within the scope of what we can, operating as a low-tax environment. So these are just some of the issues. But I think the critical point I want to make to Juan is we're working for the Manx people to deal and tackle with all these problems, but we are not alone. This is not an island that is, you know, the rest of the globe is dealing and trying to tackle with some of these problems and they're reflective in many ways in many countries in a far worse position than the island is.
But I think one thing I was going to point there and pull out from Juan's comment, and it's reflected in a lot of the texts and questions that I've had in ahead of the show, so apologies if I'm not reading out everyone's question, but it was more about the running the island for the island people, the Manx, and the identity of the Isle of Man. I've had one question saying, why is the government ignoring the long-standing Tynwald resolution that Manx language is represented on all government correspondence, where it's now been missing from the new driving licences? Why have we got people coming in as new chief execs who are coming in from further afield and don't know the Isle of Man? Is the government... You keep repeating over and over about the world situation and the global situation, the economic situation. People understand that. That's the role of government, to do all that kind of stuff. On the day-to-day, it feels that government is out of touch, that the things that matter to people when they get up in the morning and they see the promenade looks tatty, they don't do this. This is not done in parks. Fences are broken. It's a case of, it's not big money things. It's caring for the place we live. And it's almost a case of they get the feeling that the government isn't doing any of that. That means on an emotional level to people. Now, is that being addressed? Is it even discussed?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I agree with you that promenade is tatty. I've spent this morning actually on the promenade.
Patched up tarmac, rusty railings,
with a visitor, and there's always going to be small bits and pieces somewhere. But I'm not okay. Not going to argue to death on this, but yes, okay, there are probably bits and pieces that need sorting out. I think we've made a lot of progress, this government, actually, in terms of the levels of maintenance that are taking place across the island, and that we've made significant attempts to try and deal with that.
But why are the standards so low? I've walked into Strand Street this morning, and the new paving area by 1886, and I'll use this as a small example, has obviously failed, and it's been patched with tarmac. We spent millions on that promenade. It should be glorious. And quite frankly, you're standing on a pedestrian crossing in pools of mud because they didn't put any drains in. You've got lampposts that are still twisted and broken. There's pipes coming out of the ground that don't do anything because we didn't finish it. And despite the will of Tynwald telling you on numerous occasions, you still haven't finished the horse tram tracks.
Well,
come on. Seriously, it was voted by Tynwald, the will of Tynwald. When is your government going to do the honourable thing and actually finish that promenade? Because people will ask and people will say, maybe uninformed comment, but they will say, we can just nod through tens of millions for this Liverpool ferry terminal. Why can't we finish a project at home to a high standard? And why can't we maintain things to a high standard?
Alex, I know that when that project was curtailed was because of the overspend that was going on with the promenade, right? Because it was a project that started off, as some of these projects do, with a relatively simple plan, but rapidly became more and more complicated as that project went on, and of course eventually ran out of money. And the decision was made at the time that the levels of expenditure was such that some of that money had to be diverted to completing the promenade, and the tracks would not be at that time.
So why didn't that come back to a Tynwald vote like you've done with the Liverpool ferry terminal? Because that's exactly what's happened at the ferry terminal. We've run out of money, and we've gone over budget.
Everybody was acting totally lawfully, totally legally, and Tynwald obviously may have a view in terms of how those matters are dealt with in the future. But the Council of Ministers at that time determined that actually the way that needed to be deal with it, rather than carry on spending, was that something had to give. And these decisions are going to become more and more apparent to us.
What, the Council of Ministers overriding a rule of Tynwald? A will of Tynwald? You've just said the Council of Ministers. I know for well that, if you can answer me on this one, the 750,000 that was taken from the railway's safety budget went to, a maintenance budget went to the promenade. We had the tracks removed. This was voted for by Tynwald, and you've just said the Council of Ministers overrode that. Are we going to get more of that?
Well, no, but I mean, this has been happening for years in terms of projects, and somebody at some point has to make decisions, right? If you go back to Tynwald every single time, it can take weeks for a Tynwald decision. We're actually just reviewing that at the moment in terms of that is under discussion with Tynwald effectively. And the scrutiny.
You say it could take weeks to take a decision. On Tuesday, Alex, you've got gas you're going to go rush through in a day.
Well, hang on. So we need to understand in what circumstances Tynwald wants the government to come back. Because when you're spending millions of pounds and you have people there and then needing decisions sometimes within days as to what to do if a project runs into trouble or a design proves to be ineffective, and these things happen on big construction problems, and we need to figure that out. Can I just come on to that? So you've raised that.
Yep.
You want us to, of course, sometimes the government has to act swiftly, and in this particular case, yes, we are coming to the House of Keys with a piece of legislation because we believed it absolutely necessary to do so. So, you know, there's a time and a place for this, but it is not necessarily a simple equation. But absolutely, go to a point where, well, if you want Tynwald summoned every 5 minutes because there's a decision to be made, then we need to change the way that things are operating at the moment. And if there's a will to do that, if there's a will to change effectively the sort of constitutional setup at the moment, then no problems whatsoever. I'm very happy to have those discussions.
I think, we won't stay on this because we've got another caller on the line for too long, but the specific will of Tynwald on this case was to put the horse trams back. The specific will of Tynwald and a vote was not had on the side streets that needed paving or removing the paving from the roundels. So the decision was made to take the money away from something that had been specifically voted on. They didn't specifically vote on the roundels. They didn't specifically vote on the side streets. This has been a contentious project, and the horse trams are always something that
Alex,
was contentious.
I know you're a big supporter of the horse trams,
I am, yes.
And you're a big supporter of the trains and the trams,
Yep.
right? I'm just merely explaining to you what the position was 5 or 6 years ago during the construction of this project, right? So there is capacity to put these back clearly in terms of the structural ability to do that. Question is clearly if that were to be the case, then the money has to be found, and then clearly what else will have to go alongside that in order to fund it. That's all.
And many people's comments will be that you've already had the money, you've already voted on it,
hang
and
on
you spent it elsewhere.
Well, hang on. The money was the project cost more than the allocated budget, and a decision was made at the time that the government could not carry on affording to complete the project within capacity, and therefore something needed to happen in order to bring this project to a close and get that promenade restored and open, because it was costing businesses a lot of time and money, and obviously it was coming at considerable cost and inconvenience to the people of the island as well.
Okay, I've got one question on the back of that, and then we'll go to Nigel, who's been waiting patiently. Rodney emailed in a question on the same sort of thing. What is your personal attitude towards heritage and culture?
Well, I think it's very important, right? So it is very important. The question that we're all facing, Alex, is how to pay for all this stuff now, right? How to pay the millions and millions of pounds it is costing to run Heritage Rail, right? And to pay for all the infrastructure, because it is being, the priority list at the moment, as I said, our priority is delivery of health and education. They are the two, by far, the two biggest spending departments in government. They consume well over 50% of the government's available budgets, and the cost is growing, right? And particularly with health, it is growing almost exponentially. So our question is now a question of priorities, because and this is something we have to deal with politically, we either find and raise that money by asking people to pay more to use the facilities, but clearly have they got that capacity to do so? Do you set them up into a structure whereby it is the ability to raise funding is through some sort of trust or some sort of charitable position, or basically does the government need more income, and do you have to raise taxes? Because the bottom line is these are the sorts of decisions that are facing us, on a daily basis, and we're being charged with determining what and where and how the public funds must be spent in order to, at a level of priority to meet the what we regard as the public priority.
Nigel, you've been waiting patiently. You're on live with the Chief Minister.
Good afternoon, Alex. Good afternoon, Alf. It's Nigel Sperring from Albany Tours. Season's greetings to you both.
Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.
Alf, just a quick question. We've spoken many times before, but just to get my head round something, and I'm not a politician, I'm not a construction worker, and it's still on the base of this Liverpool terminal. And what Alex has just said, you know my background in tourism, and I'm very passionate about that. I think the cruise industry is growing well, and it should do, and we should have more finance and backing into that. And also the trams and the horse trams. I think there's a lot of money being wasted, a serious amount of money being wasted in other areas like the TT and all that kind of thing, where we just need to look after the tourist industry. But what I don't understand is that this, and it's going to exceed 100 million over budget. An island that's 23 by 13 in a population of 80,000 is absolutely crazy to have something that is that far over budget. Why was it not stopped when it went about 10, 20 million over budget to the contractors and said to them, there's something wrong here, and stopped it there and then, put them in court and say, look, I'll see you at the other end, and redo another contractor? You'd have been far better off doing that. I understand it's water depth and there's problems over there, but how on earth has it got to 100 million, and it will be, and nobody, and we don't know who's going to be accounted for, and I don't think probably we ever will. But it's a drastic amount of money for an island of this size, and I'm sure you feel in your position it's quite embarrassing.
Well, look, Nigel, no one is comfortable with the position in terms of the amount of money that has been invested into the landing stage and considering where it started. I can't answer all of your questions, but essentially, why didn't it stop at 10 or 20 million? I guess because, and again, this will have to be looked at by public accounts committees, but you get into a project, you get to a cost position. The question asked: do you keep digging or do you stop? And clearly,
have you made any cuts
evaluations that were made was that you keep going.
Have you made any cutbacks in terms of the nice to haves that we didn't need at Liverpool? Has that been looked into? Yeah.
Clearly, this is a fairly, in terms of the infrastructure that's available, and it is a functional building. In terms of the technical details, absolutely we got experienced consultants there, been looking at all the cost and the cost base. But Nigel, to answer your question, and I am no expert, and I have to hold my hand up in terms of construction contracts, but these are national standard contracts. They build in a whole range of different options and scenarios simply because these capital projects, whether they're private sector or even in the public sector, can go wrong. We've seen that multiple times, and I don't think it is possible just to pull the plug and tell the contractors that's it. You have to keep working through the legal position, and I'm sure all this will need to be examined and proper answers determined in terms of those reflective answers from the scrutiny committees or whatever Tynwald determines is needed to ensure that we get some lessons learned as per normal, so that we try and stop this from happening again.
There we go.
I'm sure you're right there, but I still feel that and whether it was you or anybody else that was in your position, that it would have been more practical to stop it at 20 million or even 30 million, because you're still 70 million over the top. And I'm sure if you'd have brought a new contractor in, it still wouldn't have cost 100 million. But I'm never going to get the answer for it. And I just hopefully that, somebody is accounted for it and we do get an end result, and something like this never happens to the Isle of Man again.
OK, Nigel, thank you very much for your call. We're back with the Chief Minister just after this.
Here's an interesting question for you. What can be modern, classical, Persian, Chinese, Indian, plain or patterned, textured or even shaggy? Have you guessed yet? No? OK, the answer's simple. They're all types of rug, and they can all be viewed in our new rug gallery at Lifestyle Furniture. Pop into our 2-story showroom where you can see and touch the biggest range of quality rugs on the island. Lifestyle Furniture. It's everything your home's been waiting for. See our website for details.
Treat your friends with gifts galore. Fa la 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 la.
Buy a new phone this Christmas with a Smart Unlimited contract from Manx Telecom and walk away with a free present worth up to £299. From an Xbox Series S to AirPods and many more. Spoil someone special or keep it for yourself. Tech the halls this Christmas with Manx Telecom. Terms and conditions apply. Visit mt.im/Christmas for details.
Step into Office World, the island's largest fully stocked stationery store, where there's over 5,000 items on display to take away. From pens, paper, inks and toners to general stationery, adhesives and batteries. You can get what you need right now from Office World. With all the big brands, including Pilot, Pentel, Sellotape, Duracell, Gorilla, Pucker Pads and more. Office World is conveniently located on Spring Valley Industrial Estate, with easy parking right outside the door.
Office World!
There's a new way to Subway with 2 fantastic menus. Which will you go for? The all-new Subway series with 15 irresistible creations like the Big Bombay Sub, Great Goddess Salad, Emperor Wrap and Big Cheesesteak Sub Melt. Or create your own. You pick the ingredients you want and build your own sub, salad or wrap the way you want it. There's a great mix of healthy and indulgent menu items available from Subway in ShopRite, Peel and Port Erin.
Manx Radio, the nation's Christmas station.
The only station we listen to at the North Pole.
OK, it's 1:45. We're still live with the Chief Minister on Mannin line this afternoon. Going back to the phones in a sec. Chief Minister, had a message in from a lady who wants to remain anonymous, but she was at A&E earlier this week after being taken in by ambulance, experienced a long waiting time, was told there was a lack of beds and had to stay on a seat, and eventually, because the waiting time was so long, she got a taxi home and nothing was done. Do we have a winter crisis in terms of our NHS? And the other question that she puts off the back of this is, if we have a winter crisis, why is our health minister more concerned about the bishop's vote? Over to you.
Well, listen, I mean, I'm, clearly A&E at any point in time, because of, whatever's happening around, could potentially result in a long wait. I know that people have clear sort of parameters in terms of the prioritisation of what gets looked at as a matter of urgency. I'm really sorry that somebody had to go to A&E and ultimately get a taxi home because they couldn't get seen. And I'm not aware of a winter crisis. I am obviously aware that the Manx Care did issue a warning about vomiting bug and that it was highly contagious and was moving around the island. I have not received any formal notification that the health service is functioning at a critical level at the moment. So I'm sorry about that, but I presume that was just the circumstances on the day. Do you feel that Manx Care model is working? Because there is this disconnect that actually, before Manx Care came along, the health minister, whoever he or she was responsible. And in terms of, from a democratic point of view, one of the things we love about the Isle of Man is how close we can get to our politicians. You and I can have this conversation and debate on air. But now there seems to be that disconnect of it's Manx Care's problem. It's Manx Care's problem, where it's paid for by us. So is the Manx Care model working, or is there more to be done that actually, if there are issues, problems, crises, that the health minister should be able to go, look, this is something we need dealing with, as it was in the past before the establishment of Manx Care? Well, I've been dealing with healthcare crises ever since I walked into the House of Keys and Tynwald, 12 and a half years ago. So this is not necessarily something that is new. I've been dealing with overspends in the health service for 13 years. I've been dealing with a lack of confidence in the system. Remember, one of the first things that happened when I came in was that West Midlands were called in to look at the Isle of Man health system for 3 or 4 years, because that people were genuinely concerned about the safety of patients in operations and that period. So, there was very good foundations for us to want to change the way that Manx Care was operating. It has only been operating effectively now for two years or so, I think, and it still needs that chance to continue to see the continuous improvement in terms of delivery. There's been a strong we're spending millions of pounds on transformation in terms of trying to improve the effectiveness of our delivery, trying to work out what the service levels should be over here, and making sure, of course, that we are working as closely as possible with our counterparts in the Northwest to maintain the highest levels of service. But there is still pressure on the system, and a lot of that pressure at the moment is around staffing resource and the availability of staff. So there's still some way to go. But Manx Care, critically, do have now a critical year in front of them to prove their worth, and a lot of that, of course, is going to come around their delivery within budgets. So I go back to the issue that we were talking about. It's a demand-led service, but nevertheless, they now have to get a grip of how the money is spent, the prioritisation applied to that, and to deliver the best service possible within the allocation that they are currently receiving. So one more year, I think this will be a critical year for them in 2024-25.
Okay. Can you understand the optics from I know it's a glib comment at the end there, but the optics of people who don't know the ins and outs of Tynwald, they don't know the ins and outs of government and its operation, when they turn around and say, and it is an example, I grant you, there are others, that when she says, why is the health minister more bothered about the bishop's vote rather than sorting out the problems of my health? How can you explain that to the person on the street who thinks that?
Well, that's up to them. That's up to Laurie Hooper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me be absolutely clear, because there is some confusion.
Yeah.
This is not a government matter. This is a private member's bill. Mr. Hooper is determined that this is a matter for him to resolve. I have no idea why he has chosen to bring that on to the floor of Tynwald. If I felt that he was deprioritising health in any way, then clearly that I would be significantly concerned. But, he has that right. We talked about democracy earlier, Alex, who started challenging me on democracy earlier in the programme. He has a democratic right to do that. Personally, as you know, I completely disagree with him. I also don't think, in terms of the national priorities, that it is anywhere near anything like the top of the list, and I can understand why your caller is concerned.
Lovely. Thank you for clearing that up. Stephen, you're on live with the Chief Minister. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Alex. Good afternoon, Chief Minister. And most importantly, good afternoon, listeners. I wonder if I could make some points and ask for some comments, please. The first one would be over the promenade and the horse trams. You know, and I think the listeners know, that that's a one-off, and it's not really fair to say you can't run to Tynwald all the time. That was a major scheme. In fact, if I remember rightly, Bill Malarkey brought another motion to Tynwald to ensure that the trams ran the full length of the promenade, and I would suggest it wasn't brought to Tynwald because you probably knew you would lose the motion and you would have to find more money. It was skullduggery at its worst, politics at its best. So that's the first observation. The second one is that I do hope that you do agree that the freedom of information should go to the steam packet and the MDC, because both these entities have the capability to borrow huge sums of money. MDC, I don't agree with the plan for Westmoreland Road. It's far too dense and involved with that particular plan. When it comes to planning, I do hope that due process is followed and it's not called in by the Council of Ministers to approve or disapprove. I do think we should let the independent planning inspector do his work properly on that.
Okay, Stephen, because I'm running short of time, let the Chief Minister come back on your question there in terms of FOI. I know you've stood up here in Tynwald and Keys and said that actually the steam packet, the Manx Development Corporation, I believe Isle of Man Meats as well off the top of my head, isn't subject to FOI. The steam packet one is the one that's been talked about a lot by, I know, a colleague, Mr. Thomas. In terms of the use of government money, they've had substantial amounts of government money. Why should the public not be allowed to ask an FOI?
Well, we're going to look at that. I think, when Tynwald purchased, when we went to Tynwald and said, when I went to Tynwald and said, look, I think it is in the national interest to purchase the Isle of Man steam packet. We're fed up of it being leveraged by corporate institutions to borrow money. We don't know what value we're getting out of it. It was done, and many members of Tynwald at the time, and I know Tynwald's changed in the makeup, but there were many members of Tynwald. There were a very strong view for the Council of Ministers at the time, and bear in mind it's a collective, was that actually this should continue to run as much as possible as a private enterprise. Clearly, the control is issued through the through the Sea Services Agreement as a DOI, and there's various fare structures, etc., that need to be managed and agreed. And obviously, the shareholder at the moment, of course, is the Treasury Minister. He has regular meetings with the company, and there are some agreed limitations about what they can and cannot do in that shareholders agreement. So absolutely.
Would you like to see them on subject of FOI?
Well, I think we are going to look at it. We just need to assess the impact. One can see what some of the movers of this, Mr. Thomas effectively want. They want to almost get control of the company. One of the concerns when we brought it was that actually it would just become effectively a vehicle, basically, for political popularity, if you like, and eventually it would just not become a private company, and you wouldn't get the professional levels of professionalism you need to maintain a shipping company like that. I know everyone thinks it's very simple to run. That's probably not very fair. There's a lot of professionalism needed. And of course, when it comes to that level of freedom of information, then you generally tend to find some impact in terms of the way that people act and behave. And we want to make sure, that's all we're asking, is just this time now to evaluate and make sure it's going to properly add value to the taxpayer, and there are no reasons that it's going to be used nefariously to gain advantage to other people who may either be acting to seek competitively and therefore thus damage.
Although there are safeguards to that in the legislation, aren't there? That when it comes to nefarious and also commercial interests.
No. Yeah, well, there is some safeguards. So we just need to assess this, Alex. That's all, and that's what our undertaking is. I don't have a massively strong position on this, but we just need to have a look, and that's what we're committed to do.
As a company in Radio Manx Limited, whose beneficial owner is the Treasury, and we're subject to FOI, it's nice to hear you say that, Chief Minister. We're out of time. Thank you very much. As
Alex,
you can imagine,
can I just quickly wish everybody who's listening and did everybody across the island a very happy Christmas, and I hope people get some time to sit and relax for a day or two anyway.
Thank you, Chief Minister, for coming in. We could have discussed a whole variety of different questions. Thank you for all your questions you've sent in for Alfred Cannan today. I hope you're not feeling too bruised, Chief Minister. Would you come back again and talk to us about in the new year?
Of course.
Have a lovely Christmas,
Thank you.
and to you and yours. Stick around on your nation station. Christy de Haven is up next with 1 to 3. I shall be back probably on some show or other by Monday. Who knows which show it'll be, the way things are going. Have a lovely weekend and do take care of each other. Ta-da now.
You'll find a real home away from home behind the